Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. My guest on One of a Kind is the artist and retired University of Iowa professor George Walker. Moving to Iowa City 43 years ago, George taught in the Art and Art History Department at the university, retiring in 1997. An art expert places his work in the abstract expressionist school of art and describes him as a colorist, where the juxtaposition of color dominates the canvas with a minimal use of recognizable subject matter. His works have been called joyful, exuberant, bold, energetic, colorful, and even humorous. In the past, galleries in San Francisco, Chicago, Minneapolis, Des Moines have shown his work. Also museums from Chicago, Kansas City, St. Paul, and even the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro. In downtown Iowa City, just step into the first floor of Hotel Vetro, and there are 4 bold and colorful pieces of his work. Fans of his can also view large and colorful acrylics on paper in the ophthalmology clinic in the Pomerantz Pavilion at UIHC, also in 2 local galleries and in many, many private collections. George and his wife Carolyn raised 3 children in Iowa City, Mick, Mary, and Martha. Welcome to One of a Kind.
Thank you, thank you.
Your story, I know, begins in Gaylord, Michigan, where you were born in 1924.
Yeah.
I read that your grandfather served in the Civil War. There's got to be a story to this, George.
Well, I would think so, but it amazes me, not that I'm young, I'm old, but it's the fact that my grandfather was in the Civil War is just hard to imagine, but he was. He went in as a very young boy, and they kicked him out because he was 11 years old. But back then, they did go very young, and they would go as drummers and such.
He was an 11-year-old?
11 years old, and they realized after he had come in, and they kicked him out. Then he went back when I think he was just going on 13 and got in. And so he became a member of the Northern troops. And so he was in the Civil War, and that is a long, long time ago.
And how did he get to Michigan, or what brought him to Michigan?
Well, what happened is he is from New York, and he an orphan, and he after he liked the Michigan troops that he was assigned to in the Civil War, and so he followed them out as a kid to northern Michigan. Settled down out there, ended up meeting my grandmother and marrying, raising 5 children, and it was really a crazy story. Here he is, this little guy, I don't know how little he was, I never knew them, but he coming from New York as an orphan, coming out of the Civil War, still as a young teenager, and ending up in Michigan, and he was never adopted. He never knew his mother and father. And so he was the first family that took him in but didn't adopt him was named Skinner, and the second family, they got rid of him. The second family that took him in was named Walker, and he liked them better.
And he liked the name Walker, so your family took the name Walker.
The second family that took him in, so he took their name and called himself Walker. So he named himself. And I don't know idea what my name would be otherwise. I mean, because I don't know anything about him other than the fact he was just a young boy.
But he was a businessman.
Oh, well, then he went on, and he had a real, it is really quite amazing. He ran a theater, he ran a furniture store, he ran a funeral home, he ran I don't know how many things, and without any education. And he had 5 children, and all 5 of them graduated from college. That is something startling. For that day and age, it's just amazing that he put all of his kids through college. And so that's kind of the story of him.
Here. And what about your father? What business was he in?
Well, my dad ended up with a furniture store and a funeral home like his father had this combination. And so he had two different businesses. And so my dad had that until, I don't know when, it was sold, yeah.
Well, okay, so were there any artists in your family besides
Well, no, not per se.
Per
but
se.
My dad was really gifted in drawing, but he is a hobby sort of sketch. Two of those, there are three boys and two girls in his family, 3 boys, 2 girls. And the other 2 boys were painters, but strictly as a hobby. But they painted, and
So
I
you
have
had it in your blood.
So it
You
must
had-
have been in the
yep,
blood,
in the
right?
blood. So I also read that you joined the Army when you were 18.
Yeah.
And where were you sent?
Well, I joined the Army, and after my basic training, I was sent up to Washington, D.C. And after Washington, D.C., I was sent on over, and joined this battalion in Italy, and finished the war going, actually, if we went to Italy, and from Italy they sent us right back over. We were all replacements, and over to Corsica, the island, and we had our training, additional training for the invasion of southern France. And so we invaded in southern France. But that whole thing went so well, so fast. We moved up in there so quickly that they took thousands of guys, brought them back, put them on the Italian front, including my battalion, myself. And so then we ended up in Italy and went on up till the war ended, and we finished up near the Swiss border.
So how long were you there, a year?
Oh, I was there well over a year and a half. Yeah, well over a year and a half. Yeah.
So you were there at the end of the war, too.
Yeah, the whole, right when it ended, too, yeah. So I was there quite a while.
When you got out of the Army, when the war ended, you headed to Michigan State, and did you think at that time you were going to take on art as your life's work?
No, I started as a business major, and I didn't dislike it. I was doing all right in it, but I wasn't that happy. So I started, they had these tests that they offered. God, they ran on for 2 days or 3 days, and you'd take all this aptitude test. And when it was all done, it's pointed, I went in for assessment of it, and the lady psychiatrist told me, she said, well, no, you should be in art maybe. And I said, well, I didn't dream that's what it was going to show. And she said, yes, it does. And she said, no, you're a fool if you would spend all that time there and then you wouldn't take a course. I said, well, I'll take one. And so I did. And geez, I aced it and loved it. So I took another one and I aced it and loved it. And I said, hey, bye-bye business major.
Hello, art.
Hello, art. And so I became an art major, graduated as an art major. And then when I finished that, then I went over to Italy. I went to school there. And
Back to Italy.
Yeah, hey, back to Italy. Yeah, well, I went.
How lucky for you to be able to do that.
Yeah, it worked out well. But you know, back then, and I think it might be true of the soldiers today, the military. You got a monthly stipend of so much. If you were in a combat zone in the war, you got double the time per month. So I was always in a combat zone, so when I got back, I had 4 years of college plus about 2 more years. And so I decided, well, the government paying for it, so I said, I'll do something else. So I went back to Italy, and I went to the Accademia di Belle Arti.
And where was that? In
Rome? Yeah, in Rome. And I went to school there. And then I also did work in a studio there up in Villa Borghese, where Ulford Wilkie was there too. And I didn't know Ulford then. We were not quite at the same time, but we talked after, and we were both at the same, doing work in that as well as at the
Were you
Academy.
Married at the time you
No,
were?
I was single.
Oh, you were single.
Single, came back from there, and then I ended up back in my father's business for a while, married. My wife, Carolyn, I had known her in college, but I just an acquaintance. And then after I got back, through mutual friends of ours, we got to know each other better. We decided we should better get married, and we did. And we ended up in, coming back up to Gaylord. And we were there for, I think it was 11 years or 10 years, had 3 children, and then that was that.
But now there's got to be a story how you got to Iowa.
All right, that was coming up. I think I decided all of a sudden, I really didn't want to do what I was doing. I wasn't that happy in that. And so going backwards now to that art thing, interview, I thought, well, you know, I really want to pursue art. And so I ended up going back down to Michigan State in the graduate program, in the master's program. And I went down alone for just one term. They had 3 terms instead of 2 semesters, so I was there for 3 months. And I really liked it. And Carolyn and I talked about it and decided, well, if this is it, let's go. And so I brought the whole gang down. The kids were all little guys then. And the 5 of us settled down in East Lansing, and I was there, we were there about 2 years. And I got a master's and then a Master of Fine Arts. And then I had to look for a job. And the first one that came up was down, I taught at Indiana University for a year, and I liked that. It was very nice. But they'd send you to these, like they do today, you go to these conferences and that, and I was out in San Francisco, I think it was, I'm not sure, LA or San Francisco, it was in California. And I met Frank Seiberling. He was there from here, and we hit it off real well. And he liked me, I liked him, and he said, hey, I think I got an opening. And I said, well, let me go look. So he said, bring your wife. So he sent us both out here, and we stayed 2 or 3 days, and Carolyn loved it, and I liked it very much. And so I said, bye-bye, Indiana, and came to Iowa.
Hello, Iowa. Yeah. For viewers who are new to Iowa City, just briefly tell them who Frank and Nancy Seiberling.
All right, well, Frank Seiberling was the head of the School of Art for a number of years. He came from Ohio State University in the same job. I mean, not as a student, but I mean, as and he was the head of the art school there. Then he came over here as the head of the art school. And so Frank and Nancy had lived here for, I suppose, 10 years or so when I got out here. And then we became good friends, and so we were right up until Frank died. I mean, we were always very good friends and close friends, and we would often go to their place up in Canada for a couple of days, and they would come to our place in Michigan. So worked out well.
And Nancy, for people who was very instrumental and has been a backbone for years with Project Art.
You bet.
I mean, Project Green.
Project Green,
yes.
Yeah, she has, and you know, a real winner. And she has. She's done a great job, a hard worker, and been very generous of her time and money.
Made a lot of difference in Iowa City.
Right.
Let's talk about your teaching before we get to your art. What kind of a were you a little tough?
And well, yeah, in this sense I was. I think I like teaching very much. I got along well with students. And I was tough in the sense that, I mean, art classes, sometimes they feel this isn't advanced biology, so I don't have to be there on time, or I can leave a little early.
It's not chemistry or cellular biology.
And I said, that's not the way it works in my class. Believe me, it does not work that way. You're here on time, the door is closed, and you don't leave until it's over, and then you're going to be on your way. And so I said, with that in mind, and you have to be here. You can't say, well, I know, but I'll miss a third of the classes. Well, I've more than one kid, so I said bye-bye to, because they didn't believe me.
Sure.
And but the word got out, and so they were all, and I found, hey, they like you just as well. They'll work that much harder. They're there all the time, and they'll learn more. So it was a good idea to be a little firm.
It was fun. I would walk along the river and see you with your class, and they were sketching and just so intent in what they were doing.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. Because I remember seeing you more than once when you'd be out you and John taking your morning walk.
And you'd be there with your...
I'd be there with my gang of 20 or so, and we would sketch.
Was it drawing? Was that
yeah, I like to do landscape. I mean, you do still life inside, then we would do landscape outside. I wanted to have them be out there where it's landscape.
Sure.
And then we would do a lot of figurative drawing with models. We spent more time with models than any single thing, but we tried to cover all bases, and so that's kind of...
How was it for you to balance the teaching and your urge to create?
Well, I found that, you know, I still had a lot of free time, and I had a studio at that time in Old North Hall they gave me, and I crossed the river when class was out, and I could work till dinner time, and then I could go back in the evening and work, and so I had a lot of free time, and then I never taught in the summer. So I always had the full summer off, and I was quite productive then. I did that up in Michigan.
And you have this wonderful place in Michigan with the colors of the sky and water, and you spend the summer, and you have a studio there too?
Yeah, I have a studio there too. And so when we actually decided, hey, if you're going to take the summers off, let's have a place to go, and so you can work. Sure. So we bought a place in northern Michigan on the lake, and we It's great, and my studio is a large garage that I've painted and put on the ceiling and lights and stuff, so it works well as a studio. And I've been doing that now for 43 years.
Oh, my goodness, it
Yeah.
is a second home, totally.
Yeah.
And Kara, who is head of adult programs here and services, and Matt, who's the AV tech guru here, went out to Cosgrove
Yes.
the beginning of this week and have some wonderful photographs of. Talk about this place out there that artists go and have studios, and it's very unique.
Yeah, it is unique, and I don't know for a fact what I'm about to say is a fact, but I've been told this, so
Sure.
I assume it's true. This is the Catholic Church is there. It's a charming church. It truly is a pseudo-Gothic type of church, in excellent condition. Grant Wood painted that, by the way. He painted. I don't mean he painted the walls.
Sure.
He painted a picture.
No, got it.
Yeah. And so anyway, then there was the rectory and the school, the gymnasium, and all. But then I think it was probably when the transportation came in, where they were actually dealing with bringing kids into Iowa City. I'm guessing that's what had happened, because the school was, well, first grade through 8th. And so they had to abandon that. So when they did that, the parishioners of the church formed this group, and they bought the school and the gymnasium. And they own that today, and not the church. And they rent it. And they decided they'd take the school building itself with 12 rooms and use it for artists. And so it's been art for a long time. And also in the small places like the principal's office and these kinds of things, we always have had a lot of writers' workshop people too, who will come out to have a little privacy and a space they can call their own. And so that's how that part came about.
How wonderful. Do you go out there every day when you're in town?
I try to. I don't go as much as I did, 10 years ago,
Sure.
but I go a lot. Yeah, sure. I go out most days. I'm out there, but I don't go out 7 days a week and stay till 10:30 at night every time. Not like I did at one time.
Not like you used to.
Right. But they still, the church is still there, and I think they've rented the rectory as a home, and they sold what I told you, the school. But the church is viable. It's very active church.
And for people who don't know, who are new to Iowa City, how far is, where is
Well, it's
Cosgrove?
exactly from where I live, 10 miles. So from the western city limits of Iowa City, it would be about 8.5 miles.
So there are about 12 artists, about?
Yeah, they would be
12
about 12 if all of them are not necessarily always occupied
Sure.
each room at the time, but usually it's quite heavily set. So it's about that. Yeah.
Well, tell me about when you start to have a canvas, or do you have something in mind when you put color on paper, or
Yeah.
how does it come?
Every artist works differently, but I think that there's a commonality among all of us to some degree. And I sketch a lot. I do sketch a lot. I'm terribly guilty of not putting them in books for page 1, page 2, this kind of thing, and then fill another book, and then fill another book. I mean, I'll grab the back of this, and I'll sketch. It's on everything, on envelopes and whatever, but I got them all over by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
It's like somebody knitting. I mean, some people, you got that
That's
going.
it. Yep.
Yes.
Well, so away I go, and so now what I'll do then is I'll look through those and I'll say, well, I kind of like that one, and then I'll think about it and I'll think, well, I'm going to alter it this way, and then I'll say, okay, let me blow it up into a painting, whether it's a painting like big, or whether it's a painting like this, and or a painting like this, and so that's how it happens.
That's how
Yep.
it happened. I got to ask you, for someone untrained in critiquing art, do you agree that you have a graphic artist approach to your paintings and watercolors, or would you put it in those words?
No, I wouldn't say
No.
graphic, although it has hints of that in it. There's no question about it. But I would say that that's not the direction I would go. I don't know just in words what I would say if it's not that.
But that is not something you...
No, that's not something that really enters my mind knowingly when I'm sketching.
Well, you do series. Do you have a favorite? I just love the ones in the Hotel Vitro. They're just so joyful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And do you have it's like picking your favorite child. Do you have any period of your work that you just have loved so much?
Yeah, that you speak of, I've been doing for some time. And for a long, long time. Let's go back in our conversation 10, 15 minutes ago, and we're talking about Italy. I mean, here as a kid, go over there during a war, and then going back and going to school, and then living in Italy. And so I had this kind of a connection that made an influence on me. And I think of it as Italy and the Mediterranean, and I mean like France and Spain, and you can go to Greece, and you can go to Israel, and Egypt, all the way around. And so it's a Mediterranean influence, I felt. And so I titled the series, the Mediterranean Series. And now, some people would be hard-bent to find out where's the Mediterranean, but that goes back to our earlier conversation, too. I mean, I try to deal with something like the waves that refer to the water, refer to that, and then they would have sails, sailing through space and time over the history of the Mediterranean, which goes back with a history of thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And so that's kind of what that is. Now, I have done a series, which was just, I want a little break away from it, where I would bring in all kinds of things that were related to, like, well, I don't know, in the Roman Forum, because it was on the Mediterranean, and I would include it in the painting. And then I would take something else from, I don't know, France, like the Eiffel Tower or something. But then I would add a lot of nonsense, too. I got carried away with that, and I would take things from the funny paper and that which had nothing to do with it. But they're still part of the Mediterranean series. Yeah.
And they're fun to
yeah,
view.
they've been fun to look at, and they're fun to do, and it lets the old imagination really wander way beyond, you know.
How did you get the clap? All your pieces in clap.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
Well, she liked my work very much, as did Howard from the museum. She, Kristen.
Yes.
And and she and Howard from the museum liked my work, and so they decided they were going to do something there. And so I don't know this, but I think he might have suggested to her see George Walker's work, or she might have said to him, I'd like to go see it, because he kind of acted as an art advisor with her. And so they came to my studio, and we looked things over, and then I had this one storage closet where he said, is there anything, they said, is there anything else in there? And I said, well, yeah. And pardon me, and I opened the door, and they started pulling these large paintings out. And they lined this whole entryway with all these paintings. They said, that's it, that's what we want. So they wanted 10, and I only sold them 9. I didn't want to sell those other 2 or 3 I had left in there, so I sold them 9 paintings. And there's
a wonderful plaque with your name on it, the George Walker Gallery.
Surprise!
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So she said, call it. They're all hung and everything. Museum hung them, and they let me know, so I went over to look, and ding dong, there's a bronze plaque there. It's called the George Walker Gallery, which was real sweet of her, real nice, and I thanked her very much.
And they'll get put back after they fix up from the flood.
They're
right?
in storage now, but they will be returned. No one knows what's going to happen,
Sure.
as we all know, flood-wise at this point. But yes, they'll go back to Clap. Yeah.
You did a piece. You were commissioned with 3M in St. Paul. How did that come? That's a wonderful piece.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, that one is that that's the same Hancher Auditorium. I did two of them. And Hancher Auditorium had one in their main lobby when you come in. And that one, by the way, I don't know what's going to happen. They took it over to Becker Hall and put it in the basement, thinking it might be when the storm was coming, the rain, the water, the flood. Well, it filled right up and it floated around. And so I don't know what's going to happen to that. They had me come over and look at it, and I don't know. But that's not mine. That's the university's.
Yep.
And but I made 2 of them. But what it was is I had a show. The Museum of Modern Art down in Rio de Janeiro gave me a one-man show. And so it was both sculpture and paintings, both 2 and 3D. So I made a couple of them, and I took one of those down there. And then when that came back, I had that in storage. the university got this one for Hancher, and the people from 3M, Minnesota Mining Manufacturing up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, had seen it, and for somebody there, and they came over to my studio and said, we'd like one like it. And I said, I happen to have one. And extra, so I sold them that one. Yeah.
It's great. It's so joyful.
Yeah.
I was talking to Joyce Summerwell about your work, and she, for people who are new, was the former director of Project Art at the University Hospitals and Clinics, and she said that the pieces that they have in the ophthalmology clinic and other pieces that they have of yours, that patients come through the hospital and feel a sense of well-being, and it's a lovely legacy that art can do that for people who are going through traumatic times.
Well, thank you, Joyce, for saying that.
Yes.
That's very kind. They're very thoughtful, and I'm very pleased and honored that they have quite a few of my pieces over there.
Yep.
And but I'm glad that they do more than just ding dong and there's a painting and walk on. Yeah.
No, people do look at them. I've got to ask. I always ask my guests who, in looking back in your life, very full life, who has had a major influence on you?
Well, total life, total. Well, I would have to, of course, start with my parents. I mean, and my mother, great gal. My father, those were both very much so. And my father's family, greater family that we discussed earlier, with all of the uncles and aunts. They became my uncles and aunts, and they were all great people. And they all did some exciting things. They, well, one of them was taught at the University of Iowa 1,000 years ago when you cross the Iowa River on a raft-like thing. And then he went out to UCLA and taught out there.
This was an uncle?
An uncle.
Oh, for
That's
heaven's
one of those.
sakes.
Yeah, that was an uncle.
I didn't know that.
Well, I didn't know it either until back, I don't know how many years ago, and I realized when I put it all together, and I asked my Aunt Stella about it. He had died. Uncle Paul had. And oh yeah, he was very good. And he wrote a lot of books. He was very successful, and he did things back then that were unusual. He started a campaign, this whole idea of going out, and he would lecture at these major corporations on business ethics and things like that, which he pioneered that and wrote books about it and sold a ton. Made a fortune at it. So anyway, another one was a senator, and so they did all kinds of things. They were successful people, worked hard, good gay.
Yeah, good game. Well, that's a nice legacy you have. Very much. You and Carolyn raised 3 children in Iowa City. Tell me what they're doing, what they're about, just briefly.
All right. Mick is the oldest. Mickey is now the head finance officer for the University of Iowa's athletic department. So he lives here in Iowa City, married with 2 children, and so he's a busy boy doing that budget for the. And then the next oldest one is Martha, who lives in Minneapolis, and married, 2 children, and her husband is with this Philadelphia corporation, and he travels constantly, and they're happily married up in Minneapolis, which works out great. And the third one is Mary, the youngest one, and she is at the athletic department at the University of Michigan.
Well, you and your wonderful wife, Carolyn, love to travel.
Yeah.
You two are always doing something just fascinating, whether it's around South America or back to Italy.
Yeah.
You have that bug. You've been bitten by the travel bug.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we both have. And because, well, shortly after I got back from Italy 1,000 years ago, as we spoke of, Carolyn the next year was over there, and she was over there for over half the year and traveling in Europe, and especially living down in Sicily for 2 months or so. And so so she had the bug too, and so that worked out well. So we've been very fortunate that we're able to have those summers off and had the free time to take the trips to wherever.
And you're growing up, your parents went down to Florida, and you would go to school in Florida when you were young.
I did.
And there's near water, obviously, with great blue skies.
Fort Lauderdale. Yeah.
Fort Lauderdale. So you have water a lot. Where you know up in Michigan, you're on water.
Yeah, that's true.
You live not too far from the Iowa River here.
Oh, I lived above the river for a long time.
I know it, and then down in Florida. So water is a theme.
Well,
in
I
a
never
lot
thought
of your-
about that, but you're right. Maybe that's those waves in
those
my painting.
waves. So what do you have some favorite artists yourself that you love?
Oh, yeah.
Are drawn to?
Oh, yeah, I have to go Matisse. I mean, there's no question in my mind Matisse has to be a major influence, not only of me, but thousands of others. And that would be a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And Miro was always a big influence. Yeah, really a major one. In more contemporary things, Ellsworth Kelly is very much a favorite of mine. It has been for a long, long time. I love the way he did this minimal amount of work that made people realize that can work too visually with just like one shape on a white canvas in one color, and it still all of a sudden, ding, it has a resonance about it. So he's a major one, yeah.
So my last question is, what are you working on now?
Well, right now, actually, I'm working on, well, we're back to the Mediterranean. I'm still doing Mediterranean. I had another series that I was kind of working with somewhat in the last 6, 8, 9 years to some degree. I called Mary's Garden. And Mary's Garden has many overtones, I always felt, of the Mediterranean series, but it is different.